From the great city with its temples and palaces, from the district called Yotsuya, came a samurai swordsman who took himself a beautiful wife named Oiwa. She called him only Oto-san, saying politely, "My husband." At first the two were very happy together, but with time the restless warrior's affections began to wander. At a great banquet, Oto-san saw the lovely young maiden Matsue, and fell as much in love with her as he had once been with Oiwa. The path away from the banquet that moonless night led along a cliff above the sea, and wanting to free himself to marry Matsue, the samurai pretended to stumble in the darkness and shoved his attentive wife over the edge. At dawn the samurai and his friends combed the beach below the cliff and found the broken body of Oiwa, whose death he had told them was an accident. After the funeral, the warrior was sleeping on his mat in the empty house, glad about his newfound freedom, when the wind outside moaned in the trees and the sliding paper walls of the sleeping room shook. Slowly, in the moonlight, one wall door slid open. There stood the ghost of Oiwa. Her long hair, so neatly combed and arranged in life, hung loose about her shoulders. Her lovely kimono was gone, and she wore a long, flowing white robe. Her face, once beautiful, was ugly and dirty. Some of her teeth were missing, and one eye laid over to the side. Her arms were bony, like those of an old woman, and her hands were like claws. She said one word: "Vengeance." Oto-san screamed and fled from the house. The next night, he slept in an abandoned house nearby, hoping to escape the sight of his dead wife. The single paper lantern he used for light hung above his mat. At midnight, he awoke. The room seemed empty, with only the paper lantern and ivy vines growing in through a break in the wall. Slowly, as the candle in the lantern began to flicker out, the samurai thought he saw his wife's face in the designs on the paper. Slowly, the vines below the lantern began to crawl like snakes into the shape of Oiwa's body. The wind blew in through a crack and swung the lantern. The candle inside tipped over, and the paper began to burn. Oiwa's face was clear in the lantern. The vines reached up toward the warrior. The bottom of the burning lantern flapped like a jaw talking. Two burning eyes looked at the husband. "Vengeance," said the lantern. The man leaped off his sleeping mat, drew his sword, cut his way out through the bamboo wall, and ran screaming down the path away from the house. Other warriors, friends of Oto-san, began to see Oiwa too. Two men were drinking tea, and she came to them asking for revenge. The next time they saw the murderer, they drew their swords and tried to kill him, so strong was Oiwa's spell over them. The husband shouted his friends' names. "Gunze," he called out. "Kaminasu, what are you doing this for?" "Vengeance," said their mouths, but it was Oiwa's voice that he heard. The ghost of his wife appeared beside the fighting men. Oto-san fled. But while Oiwa's body stayed where it stood, her neck grew very long, and her head followed him down the path. He swung his sword and cut off her head, but it just dropped to the ground like a melon and laughed at him. The next time he saw his friends, they did not remember what had happened. One day Oto-san persuaded Matsue to come to his house to see how finely she would live once they were married. While she was looking at the home, she heard a woman's voice talking to the warrior in another room. She hid behind a paper screen to listen to the conversation. All she heard was a woman's voice, and how Oto-san trembled with fear. She thought he was afraid of being caught with that other woman. Matsue did not know the woman was Oiwa. The ghost floated along the floor, with a long, long tail of white drifting behind, and its mutilated face restored to its former beauty. As if they were young lovers again, the ghost whispered in the warrior's ear.
"Vengeance,"
she said. Matsue no longer trusted Oto-san, and became enraged with jealousy. At last, by much persuading, the warrior convinced Matsue to marry him. A great engagement party was prepared. All their friends and relatives came. Oiwa came too. The ghost came into the party room and stood against the wall. Her face was as horrible as ever, with broken teeth and drooping eyeballs. Her wild hair mixed with seaweed swirled about, even though there was no wind. At first, Oto-san tried to distract everyone from looking at the ghost by boasting and talking loudly. He did not know that no one else could see her. The ghost grew larger. Oto-san tried to hide back against the opposite wall, knocking over a table and teacups, trying to escape the huge head that slowly filled the room. In desperation, he drew his sword and swung it all about, trying to cut through the ghostly face that overpowered him. All his friends stared and muttered to each other. Matsue blushed and left, never to return to this madman. All his friends laughed at what he did, and left in disgust. Oiwa laughed too, but no one heard her. The moon was dark again, and the path along the cliffs was as windy as before. A gentle woman in life, the mutilated body of Oiwa walked beside her husband, her flesh hanging loose off her skeletal face. It was too late for regret, too late for repentance. It was time for insanity and death.
"Vengeance,"
said the skull with the long black hair. The samurai stepped off the cliff and was gone. Oiwa was gone too. But on windy nights, when the paper lanterns blow, and the candle falls, and the lantern begins to burn, if you dare to look closely enough, you will see the face of Oiwa, the ghost of vengeance.